Listen closely. Something rare is happening right now. There are moments in life when a message doesn't arrive by accident. It appears because your inner world has shifted, even if you didn't notice it yet. In the Shaolin tradition, we say that the right teaching enters only when the mind is ready to receive it. And if these words reached you today, it means the timing is not random. It is alignment. I am Shiheng Yi. There is an ancient understanding among monks before a transformation becomes visible. It first takes root in silence. A person begins to sense restlessness, a slight pull away from their old habits, a strange awareness that something is ending. This is the present moment trigger, a quiet knock from within. Most people overlook it, but you didn't. That is why this message appears now, not yesterday, not tomorrow. In this video, we will walk together through the deeper layers of that shift, the ones most people never hear about. You will learn why certain teachings show up exactly at the point when your old identity begins to loosen. You will discover the subtle signs that reveal an internal ending, the ones even ancient masters treated with seriousness. And you will understand how a simple shift in clarity can dissolve years of mental patterns without force or struggle. Stay with me until the end, because the deeper truths only unfold when the noise inside you settles. There is a moment coming in this lesson that may feel like something unlocking, a point where you suddenly recognize the path your mind has been preparing for you. Welcome to Shaolin Soulfire. If you find guidance here, support the journey by subscribing and walking this path with us. Some days arrive quietly, yet they carry the weight of a turning point. The 11th of December is one of those days, not because of astrology or prediction, but because of something far more personal. The shift that takes place when your mind decides it can no longer continue the way it has been. A date becomes powerful only when your inner world assigns meaning to it. And meaning is born the moment you recognize that something in you is ready to reset. There is an old understanding in the monastery. Transformation doesn't erupt suddenly, it ripens. For weeks, sometimes months, the mind collects small realizations, subtle discomforts, quiet truths. Then, without warning, one specific day becomes the point where everything aligns. The day itself is ordinary. What is not ordinary is the clarity that breaks through within you. The 11th of December represents such a moment, a symbolic threshold. The moment the mind steps out of its habitual way of seeing and finally breathes differently. It is the day the old mental patterns begin to lose authority, not because they were defeated, but because you stopped feeding them. Think of how often the mind repeats the same story. This is who I am. This is how things must be. This is the life I sit stuck with. But then a moment arrives when those sentences sound unfamiliar. They feel heavy, outdated, almost foreign. This is the mental reset, the quiet realization that the identity you carried no longer reflects the person you're becoming. In Shaolin training, such days are treated with respect. They mark the instant when awareness rises above habit, when clarity becomes stronger than repetition, when your inner dialogue softens and you begin to see without distortion. The 11th of December symbolizes that inner shift, a doorway between who you were and who you are prepared to become. There is a teaching whispered among monks. The mind changes not in grand moments, but in the space between two breaths. That is why the instruction is simple. Look closer. Not outward, but inward. Not at the noise, but at the tiny shifts happening just beneath your thoughts. The greatest transformations rarely arrive with thunder. They begin as subtle movements in awareness, a sudden discomfort with an old habit, a quiet question rising inside you, a moment where you pause before reacting. These small details, so easy to overlook, are the cracks through which a new self begins to enter. In Shaolin discipline, students are often guided to observe the smallest elements of their practice. The angle of a step, the softness of a breath, the tension in a finger. At first, these corrections seem insignificant, but over time, these tiny adjustments accumulate and reshape the entire body and mind. The masters say, change the small and the great will follow. The inner world works the same way. Your old self does not fall apart with dramatic events. It dissolves when you start seeing things you once ignored. You notice the tone you speak to yourself with. You notice the thought that repeats every morning. You notice how quickly you shrink or how deeply you pretend to be strong. And when you see these patterns without turning away, they lose their power. The simple act of observing differently is what begins the transformation. It is the moment the mind stops being automatic and becomes awake. This is why the shift feels subtle, because it happens within the quietest parts of you. Looking closer is not about effort, it is about awareness. And in that awareness, the old self slowly releases its grip, making room for a clearer, lighter version of you to emerge. There comes a point on the inner path when the mind can no longer hide from itself. This is the essence of the Mercury shift, not planets moving, but awareness moving. It is the moment your inner voice stops whispering convenient stories and begins speaking with truth. Not harsh truth, not dramatic truth, but clear truth. For a long time, the mind can survive by avoiding what it does not want to face. It creates reasons, excuses, distractions. It builds masks and narratives that feel safer than honesty. But in every person's life, a moment arrives when these stories feel too heavy to carry. You feel tired, not physically, but mentally. Tired of pretending, tired of forcing, tired of staying in shapes you no longer fit into. This is where the Mercury shift begins. In ancient training, monks were taught to sit with themselves until every inner noise settled. In that silence, all the lies they told themselves eventually surfaced. Not lies meant to deceive others, but the subtle ones. I'm fine, this doesn't bother me, I don't need change. The master said, when the mind becomes quiet, it reveals its own untruths. And once you admit these truths internally, even softly, the old self begins to dissolve. Not because you fought it, but because honesty makes it unnecessary. A false identity cannot survive in a mind that sees clearly. You may notice this shift through small signs, a sudden clarity about what you no longer want, a discomfort with certain behaviors, a desire to speak or act in alignment with your true nature. These are not random impulses. They are signals that the mind is becoming honest with itself. When self-communication becomes truthful, the old self has no place left to hide. It fades naturally, making room for a more authentic version of you to rise, steady, clear, and aligned with your inner path. In the Shaolin path, one of the deepest teachings is simple yet difficult. See the habit you do not see. The old self is not held together by profound beliefs or dramatic choices. It is held together by small, quiet behaviors repeated so often that they become invisible. These unseen habits shape how you think, how you react, how you speak to yourself, even how you breathe when no one is watching. For years, these patterns operate in the background, guiding your life without your awareness. A certain way of avoiding discomfort, a familiar emotional loop, a predictable reaction when you feel misunderstood. None of these seem significant on their own, yet together they form the structure of the identity you call me. In the monastery, students were trained to observe the smallest movements, the twitch of a muscle, the moment the mind wandered, the instant a feeling arose. The masters would say, what you cannot see controls you. What you see releases you. To break an old self, a person does not need to make a dramatic change. They only need to see the truth of their own automatic behavior. Today, something in you has become aware of such a pattern. A thought you repeat daily suddenly feels limiting. A reaction you once justified now feels out of place. A behavior you accepted as normal now appears heavy and unnecessary. This is why this message reaches you now. Not because of chance, but because your awareness finally rose above the habit that once blinded you. The moment you see the pattern, it begins to lose its authority. Awareness breaks the cycle. When you witness your own behavior with clarity instead of judgment, the old self weakens. This is the beginning of freedom, the step where you stop living unconsciously and start choosing the path of inner mastery. There is a quiet truth on the inner path. Transformation does not wait for perfect conditions. It arrives in a single simple moment, often when the mind least expects it. The thumbnail says, "It's so simple," and that message holds more wisdom than most people realize. Simplicity is not weakness. In the Shaolin way, simplicity is power. In the monastery, students would train for years, repeating movements that appeared basic: step, breathe, focus, again and again. Many grew frustrated, believing that progress required something dramatic or secret, yet the masters watched patiently, knowing that mastery is not built on complexity. It emerges the moment a student finally understands the depth hidden inside a simple act. One day, a student would suddenly feel a movement differently, or notice a breath enter the body in a new way, or realize that their mind had been tense for years without them knowing. And in that instant, one small shift, everything changed. The old identity, once strong and certain, would collapse under the clarity of a single insight. This is how internal change truly works. A single decision to stop pleasing others. A single awareness that a habit has been draining your energy. A single breath where you allow yourself to let go. These moments are not dramatic on the outside but inside. They begin the dismantling of a version of you that no longer feels alive. Most people search for big signs, big events, big revelations. But the Shaolin masters teach the opposite. The most powerful turning points are subtle. They appear almost ordinary. Yet in that simplicity, the mind realigns itself. The heart becomes honest. The old self loosens its grip. One moment, one breath, one realization. That is all it takes for a new path to open. There comes a moment on the inner journey when something inside you no longer fits the life you've been carrying. It doesn't arrive with force. It arrives as a subtle crack, a quiet realization that the past no longer feels like home. This is the beginning of dissolution. The moment the old self starts to fall apart from the inside. It often begins with a single thought that suddenly feels outdated. A belief you repeated for years now sounds unconvincing, almost foreign. You may catch yourself thinking, why do I still hold on to this? That question is the crack forming. Awareness is slipping through. Then a behavior you once accepted starts feeling heavy. The routine that used to feel normal now drains you. The emotional patterns you once justified now feel like burdens you no longer wish to carry. In Shaolin teachings, this is known as the spirit rejecting old energy. The body reacts before the mind fully understands what is happening. Even desires begin to shift. Something you chased for a long time suddenly loses its appeal. A goal that once motivated you feels empty. A relationship, a habit, a dream, anything built on an older version of you starts to fade. This is not failure. It is renewal. The mind is shedding its previous identity. The way a tree releases its leaves when the season changes. The internal crack is not a sign of weakness. It is a sign of awakening. It means you have grown beyond the shape you once lived in. In ancient practice, this moment was seen as sacred. Masters taught that when discomfort grows, identity shrinks, and when identity shrinks, the true self begins to rise. This quiet fracture within you signals that the past no longer controls the present. The old self is loosening, making space for what comes next. There is a practice older than most people can imagine. The practice of simply watching, not controlling, not changing, not judging, just observing. In Shaolin wisdom, this is called becoming the watcher. It is the foundation of inner mastery, the place where the old self begins to dissolve naturally. The mind is usually busy, running in endless loops of thought, worry, and desire. These patterns give the old self its strength, its sense of identity. To let go of that identity, the first step is to stop feeding it. The watcher does not push the mind to be different. The watcher does not label thoughts as good or bad. The watcher simply notices them gently, without resistance. Emotions rise and fall like waves. Anger, fear, longing, regret, all pass through. Most people cling to these waves, letting them shape their decisions, their words, their sense of self. The watcher, however, allows each wave to appear and disappear without interference. By doing so, the mind begins to create space, a quiet clarity that was hidden beneath the constant noise. In Shaolin training, monks often sit in stillness for hours, learning to observe each breath, each heartbeat, each flicker of thought. Over time, they discover something remarkable. The self that seemed so permanent, the one built from habits, stories, and attachments, begins to lose its grip. The more the watcher observes without attachment, the less the old self can survive. Becoming the watcher is not passive. It is disciplined, focused, and requires patience. yet it is also gentle. In this stillness, the mind learns a new rhythm, one that is free from repetition and old identity. The more consistently you practice observing, the more the old self naturally dissolves, leaving a quiet, clear space for the new self to emerge. There's a lesson in Shaolin practice that many search for their entire lives: the power of alignment. True mastery is not about struggle or pushing against what is. It is about sensing the natural flow of life, the way a river finds its path without resistance. When the mind, body, and spirit align, action becomes effortless, and the old self begins to fall away. For years, people fight against themselves. They force decisions, force emotions, force changes that feel uncomfortable. They believe effort alone will reshape who they are. Yet Shaolin teachings remind us that forcing is often a sign that the soul has already moved beyond the path being followed. Resistance is the body's whisper, the mind's signal: this is not yours. When something is right, it carries a subtle lightness. Every step feels in rhythm, every breath feels natural, every thought feels clear. It is not dramatic, it is not loud, it is simple. The body relaxes, the mind sharpens, and the heart feels quietly certain. This is the signature of alignment. The old self, built from struggle, resistance, and habitual tension, begins to release its hold. Conversely, when something feels heavy or forced, when hesitation or doubt surfaces repeatedly, it is a sign to pause. Shaolin masters call this the wisdom of resistance. It is not failure, it is guidance. Forcing only strengthens the old patterns. Letting go allows the new self to emerge in its natural rhythm. Mastery lies in discerning this difference, when to act and when to yield. Discipline is not about constant struggle, but about listening deeply, observing honestly, and moving only when the path feels unforced. In this space, clarity replaces confusion, ease replaces effort, and the self that emerges is not fabricated. It is simply aligned. The most profound shifts rarely announce themselves with fanfare. The new path appears quietly, like dawn breaking softly over a mountain peak. It does not demand attention, nor does it force recognition. Instead, it settles gently into awareness, bringing with it a sense of clarity that feels both natural and inevitable. In Shaolin practice, the mind is trained to notice subtle currents of change. Monks observe the slightest shift in energy, the softest whisper of intuition, the fleeting moment when a thought no longer carries the weight it once did. These small signs mark the beginning of a new direction. They are quiet, yet undeniable. When the old self dissolves, there is a calm space where clarity can emerge. Decisions that once felt heavy now feel effortless. Choices that once required struggle now arrive naturally. There is a subtle sense of alignment, a quiet certainty that resonates through the mind and body. It is the feeling of walking on a path that has always existed, even if it was previously unseen. The Mercury shift is not dramatic. It is the mind becoming peaceful, sharp, and aligned. Thoughts are no longer tangled with fear or doubt. Emotions no longer dictate reaction. The old identity built on habit and repetition has released its hold, leaving room for a self that moves with purpose and ease. This new path carries a different energy. It does not need validation, applause, or recognition. It asks only for attention, patience, and trust. The quiet emergence of clarity is a sign that inner mastery is taking root, a mastery that does not rely on force, but on observation, discipline, and harmony with the flow of life. In that silence, the mind knows the way forward. It is simple, steady, and entirely aligned with who you are becoming. Today marks a quiet turning point. The message you received is not random, it is a reflection of the transformation already taking root within you. The crucial Mercury shift is unfolding, dissolving old identities and bringing a subtle yet powerful clarity to your mind. This change does not come with noise or drama. It comes through small moments of awareness, through stillness, through honest observation of your thoughts and patterns. These simple practices create space for the new self to rise, steady, calm, and aligned. Take a moment each day to notice the small shifts within you. Observe your thoughts without judgment. Allow old habits to release naturally, and follow the quiet sense of what feels right. In these practices, Even the simplest insights can lead to profound transformation. Remember, transformation is rarely dramatic. It is the gentle, consistent movement toward alignment and inner mastery. Trust in the process, honor the subtle changes, and allow your path to unfold quietly but surely. If this message resonated with you, support your journey and our work by liking this video and subscribing to Shaolin Soulfire. Walk this path of clarity and awareness with us, and let the quiet power of transformation continue to rise within you.